Few stories in Hollywood carry the kind of quiet tenderness and mystery that surrounded Sally Field and James Garner. For decades, the two were adored for their charm, talent, and undeniable charisma. But while audiences saw them smile on red carpets and light-up screens, the true depth of their connection remained hidden behind closed doors. Sally Field, a woman who has lived her life in the public eye, has rarely spoken about Garner. Until now. At 78, Sally finally broke her silence, offering candid reflections that stunned fans and revealed a side of James Garner that many never knew existed. It wasn't scandalous. It was deeply human, filled with admiration, affection, and even a tinge of regret. Today, we dive deep into their story. How Sally Field and James Garner first crossed paths, what happened behind the cameras that fans never saw, and why, after all these years, Sally has chosen this moment to speak the truth. This is not just a story about Hollywood glamour. It's about two lives intertwined by fate, respect, and unspoken feelings that lasted far beyond the spotlight. Hollywood in the late 1960s and 1970s was a world in constant motion. Stars came and went, new talent was discovered almost daily, and television was quickly rising as a rival to the big screen. Amid this whirlwind of glamour and opportunity, two stars found themselves crossing paths in ways that neither could have predicted. Sally Field, a young actress known for her breakout role in Gidget and the unforgettable The Flying Nun, and James Garner, already a seasoned Hollywood veteran admired for Maverick and the Rockford Files. Sally was still carving out her career. She had charm, intelligence, and an authenticity that made her relatable to audiences. But she was also fighting to be taken seriously. Hollywood often typecast her as the cute or innocent girl, when in reality she was hungry to prove her dramatic range. James Garner, by contrast, was already firmly established. Known for his rugged good looks, smooth voice, and calm, natural acting style, Garner had won both critical acclaim and audience loyalty. By the time their paths intersected, Garner represented everything Sally admired: professionalism, humility, and a career that had stood the test of time. Their first real meeting came during the swirl of television and film circles, where actors, producers, and directors often found themselves in the same orbit. Accounts suggest that Sally was instantly struck by Garner's grounded nature. Unlike so many of the larger-than-life Hollywood personalities, he wasn't loud or boastful. He was steady, approachable, and treated everyone, from producers to stagehands, with respect. For a young actress navigating an industry full of egos, this was unforgettable. Garner, too, noticed something rare in Sally. She had an energy that radiated beyond the cameras, a determination that belied her youthful appearance. He often remarked in interviews how he admired actors who didn't perform, but simply were, and Sally fit that description perfectly. She wasn't afraid to strip away glamour and vulnerability, which made her refreshing in a business that thrived on facades. As time went on, the two found themselves working on overlapping projects and attending the same Hollywood events. While they never became a famous on-screen duo like Hepburn and Tracy, there was always a sense of mutual admiration whenever their names were mentioned together. For Sally, Garner was an unspoken mentor figure, a man whose career represented the balance of talent and humility she longed to achieve. For Garner, Sally symbolized the new god of Hollywood, fiercely talented, independent, and unafraid to push back against an industry that often tried to silence women. Though romance rumors occasionally swirled in Hollywood gossip columns, the truth was simpler and far more profound. Their bond was rooted in respect. Sally, still searching for her true voice as an actress, found encouragement in Garner's subtle but steady approval. Garner, nearing the later years of his career, seemed quietly proud to see younger actors like Sally carrying the torch of authenticity forward. Their friendship never made splashy headlines or tabloid scandals, but it didn't need to. Instead, it formed a quiet thread in both of their lives, a connection that Sally would later reflect upon with deep emotion. For her, James Garner wasn't just another Hollywood co-star or acquaintance. He was a reminder of what it meant to stay true to yourself in an industry designed to tear people apart. And as she later admitted, those first encounters with Garner stayed with her for decades. They marked the beginning of a connection that, though understated, would eventually lead Sally Field to break her silence about what James Garner truly meant to her. When audiences think of Hollywood chemistry, they often imagine sparks flying, scripted romance, and picture-perfect scenes that seem to leap off the screen. But what people forget is that real chemistry, authentic, undeniable connection, cannot be manufactured. It either exists or it doesn't. And for Sally Field and James Garner, that rare magic was there from the start, even when the cameras weren't rolling. Though they never shared a long-running television partnership, moments when they appeared together, whether at Hollywood events, interviews, or brief collaborations, showed a natural ease that others couldn't ignore. Garner's grounded presence blended perfectly with Sally's lively spirit. Where he was calm and steady, she was expressive and full of energy. This contrast made their interactions magnetic, both on screen and off. Even in casual interviews, when sitting side by side, there was a warmth that made audiences believe there was something unspoken between them. Behind the scenes, colleagues often noted that Garner treated Sally with the same respect he gave to his longtime co-stars. He had a reputation for being a gentleman, and Sally was no exception. He listened intently to her ideas, encouraged her, and never dismissed her because of her age or gender, something that was all too common in the Hollywood of the 1970s. In an era when young women were often marginalized, Garner's support stood out, and it left an impression on Sally that lasted decades. But beyond professionalism, there was affection. Quiet, understated, but genuine. Sally has admitted in later interviews that James had a warmth that made people feel safe. For a woman who was constantly under pressure to prove herself, his presence was a rare comfort. Garner had lived through the highs and lows of the business, and he seemed to sense when Sally needed encouragement, even when she didn't ask for it. This connection created rumors in Hollywood. Tabloid journalists speculated that there might be more between them, whispering about potential romances, but those who truly knew them understood that it wasn't about gossip. Their bond was one of deep respect, and perhaps something even more poignant, timing. Both were navigating complicated personal lives and careers. Whatever emotions lingered beneath the surface, they were never acted upon. Instead, they channeled that energy into a friendship that carried a different kind of intimacy, the kind not defined by romance but by enduring trust. Still, fans couldn't help but notice the spark. Years later, when Sally was asked about Garner, she never shied away from acknowledging the special place he held in her heart. She described him as kind, funny, and always real, a rarity in a business that thrived on illusion. To her, Garner represented stability, someone she could look up to without fear of judgment. And perhaps that's why their on-screen and public interactions felt so authentic. There was no need to pretend. What audiences saw was a genuine bond. Two people who admired one another, who found comfort in each other's company, and who didn't need to shout about it for the world to believe it. This subtle chemistry, invisible to most but undeniable to those who paid attention, would remain one of the most important threads in Sally's Hollywood journey. Decades later, when she finally decided to speak up about James Garner, it was this warmth, the quiet respect and unspoken understanding, that became the heart of her story. From the outside, Sally Field and James Garner seemed like two Hollywood stars who shared nothing but warmth and admiration. Yet, as with so many stories in the entertainment industry, what the world saw was only a fragment of reality. Behind the smiles and professional respect were struggles that kept their bond, more complicated than fans ever realized. One of the greatest challenges was timing. Sally Field was still in the process of defining herself as an actress during much of the period when her path overlapped with James Garner's. Though she was already beloved by audiences for her television work, she was battling to be taken seriously in Hollywood. She had to fight against constant typecasting, proving to directors and producers that she was capable of far more than lighthearted roles. Garner, meanwhile, was already established. With decades of experience behind him, their careers were at very different stages, which meant their relationship, whatever form it took, was not always balanced. Another struggle was the personal circumstances surrounding both stars. Sally was navigating difficult relationships in her private life, including her tumultuous romance with Burt Reynolds, which consumed much of her emotional energy. Garner, on the other hand, had long been devoted to his wife, Lois Clark, to whom he was married for over 5 decades. This made any deeper bond between Garner and Sally complicated from the very start. Even if there was a spark, and many believe it remained unspoken, tucked away beneath layers of loyalty, respect, and circumstance. There was also the issue of Hollywood itself. The industry thrived on gossip and speculation, and both Sally and Garner were aware of how easily their friendship could be twisted into scandal. For Sally, who was building her credibility, whispers of an affair with an older married star could have threatened her career. For Garner, who had cultivated a reputation as a gentleman and a devoted husband, it could have tarnished the image he worked so hard to maintain. To protect themselves, and each other, they kept whatever they shared carefully private. Yet despite these struggles, there was a quiet emotional bond that endured. Sally often described Garner as someone who made her feel safe in an industry that often felt predatory and cruel. For her, that was invaluable. Garner, in turn, seemed to admire Sally's resilience. He saw in her the same qualities he valued in himself: authenticity, determination, and a refusal to let Hollywood define who she was. Still, the boundaries of their relationship were defined as much by what wasn't said as by what was. The struggles, timing, personal commitments, and professional risks meant that any deeper connection was always out of reach. This gave their bond a bittersweet quality. They cared deeply for one another, but there was always a line that could not be crossed. Sally would later admit that the emotions she carried for Garner were complex. It wasn't simply admiration, nor was it romantic infatuation. It was something in between, a recognition of a kindred spirit, someone whose presence mattered to her in ways that words could not easily capture. And perhaps that's why, even decades later, she finally felt compelled to speak about him. The silence that had defined their relationship for so long was finally broken, allowing the world to see the struggles, the tenderness, and the truth. When Sally Field finally opened up about James Garner at 78 years old, it felt like the closing of a circle. For decades, she had spoken cautiously about the people who shaped her life and career, never revealing too much and often guarding the most delicate emotions in silence. But when the subject of James Garner came up, her words carried a weight that stopped fans in their tracks. She described him as the one who got away, not in the literal sense of romance, but in the sense of a bond left unresolved. Garner was a man who, in her words, made her feel understood in a way very few people ever had. In Hollywood, a place full of masks, egos, and constant pressure, he was the rare person who didn't need to pretend. For Sally, who had spent her life fighting to be taken seriously, Garner's quiet strength and authenticity left an indelible mark. Her confession was not one of scandal, but of emotion. She never claimed that they had an affair or that their bond crossed inappropriate boundaries. Instead, she spoke of the deep respect, admiration, and quiet affection she always carried for him. What broke fans' hearts was the bittersweet tone of her words. It was as though she had spent her whole life protecting this truth, and now, at 78, she felt free to let it out, both as a tribute to Garner and as an acknowledgement of her own humanity. Sally also touched on the fragility of timing in life. She admitted that sometimes the right person comes along at the wrong time, and that was the case with James Garner. While she was entangled in other relationships, including her long and complicated love story with Burt Reynolds, Garner was steadfastly loyal to his wife Lois. That loyalty, Sally emphasized, was one of the things she admired most about him. And yet it was also the very thing that kept their bond confined to the boundaries of friendship and professional respect. What makes her revelation so moving is the humanity behind it. Sally was not painting a picture of a lost romance in the traditional sense. Instead, she was sharing the story of an emotional connection that could never fully blossom. It was about missed chances, silent understandings, and the pain of realizing that some feelings must remain unspoken. For Sally, this truth lingered for decades, and it was only in her later years that she found the courage to say it aloud. Her honesty resonated deeply with fans. Many saw in her words a reflection of their own experiences, those quiet, what-if relationships that linger in memory, even when life takes a different path. It made her confession not just about Hollywood, but about the universal human experience of love, timing, and regret. In the end, Sally's words about James Garner were less a scandalous reveal and more a poignant love letter to a man who meant more to her than she had ever admitted before. By breaking her silence at 78, she allowed herself and her fans to finally honor the truth of what he represented in her life. It wasn't about secrets or affairs. It was about connection, timing, and the bittersweet realization that some bonds, though never fully realized, stay with us forever. With tears in her eyes, she described James Garner as someone who shaped her heart in ways she could never forget. And as fans listened, they understood why this confession, after so many years, mattered so much. It was more than a story about two Hollywood stars. It was a story about life, love, and the truths we carry until we're finally ready to let them go.